The Bad Guys show released their second season close to a month ago, and once again, I find myself scrambling to catch up with things. What's even happened to my video schedule these days? Anyway, one of my favourite franchises of the 2020s has got to be The Bad Guys, which made its debut back in 2022 with the first film. Like many other films in the Dreamworks catalogue in this current era, it didn't exactly set the world on fire with its box office takings, only grossing $250 million, but regardless, it was a success for the studio and was just really good in general. It felt like a fresh and unique movie from a studio that had been struggling for quite a long time and whose reputation had been suffering. Thankfully though, they didn't end things with this one single film, because one thing I love about Dreamworks is that more than any other animated studio, they just love to milk the hell out of everything that's even remotely successful for them. The Bad Guys got a decent box office gross? Hell yeah, we'll take that, and then we'll follow it up with a couple of made-for-Netflix specials. The only problem of course being that these specials kinda sucked, which is sadly often the case. I remember thinking that their Christmas special, The Bad Guys, A Very Bad Holiday, was absolutely horrendous and did almost nothing right, whilst their Halloween short film, The Bad Guys Haunted Heist, it was a massive improvement overall, but at the same time it fell very far short of the movie in every single way. The reality was that the animation felt poor even with reduced standards, the voice acting left a lot to be desired and fell very short of the portrayals by the movie actors, and then the story felt hokey and lame. It lacked the intrigue and stakes of the film and had none of the charm and wit that I'd come to associate with the movie and its characters. I know that this sounds kind of harsh, and I do try to be fair about these things and not hate for the sake of hating, but these specials just weren't it. Then we come to the second film, and it was amazing. I was a little worried they weren't going to be able to replicate what made that first film so fun now they were no longer criminals, and so much of the story would feel different as a result, but it only went to show that I shouldn't have doubted at all. It was an amazing movie, and in the end, it did about as well as the first one at the box office, grossing $240 million off a budget of $80 million. Perhaps it would have been nicer to see it make some significant increases and cement itself as a true franchise player for the studio, but I suppose that maintaining their position is better than a massive decline. Not too long after that, we got the news they were going to be releasing a prequel show on Netflix, and I was rather worried, all things considered. As I said earlier, Dreamworks, more than any other studio, loves to milk their franchises for all they're worth. They love making sequels and spin-offs and specials and, of course, TV shows. All the big names you associate with Dreamworks have had this sort of continuation in one way or another. Shrek, Kung Fu Panda, Madagascar, How to Train Your Dragon, and Megamind all come to mind when you think about the Dreamworks franchise conveyor belt of content. You would think this would be a good thing across the board for the audience. After all, who wouldn't want more of their favourite franchises in all these different forms? The problem, though, is that not all shows are created equal. Some are truly incredible works that tie into the franchise well, understand the characters, and tell a compelling story. Others completely fumble it and make a largely unwatchable experience that makes you angry at how they've massacred a once great film. For every Dragon's Race to the Edge, there's a Megamind Rules or Dreamworks Dragons The Nine Realms. Thus, when that first season of The Bad Guys was announced, it was rather hard to have any faith in it at all. I mean, why would I? It was being made by the same team that made those horrible specials after all, Dreamworks Animated TV or whatever it's called. I just didn't see how it could be good based on the fact that they clearly hadn't managed to get it right in the past. Once again, it went to show how much I know, because the first season of The Bad Guys breaking and released on Netflix in November 2025 and was actually awesome. Maybe it was the fact that they didn't have to tie the narrative into a holiday gimmick and thus they could tell the story they actually wanted to tell. Maybe long-form storytelling just improved everything and let them flesh out the characters far more than they could before. It's hard to say. The only thing that was clear was that the show was very good, but at the same time, they had a lot of room to improve for future seasons. So that in turn brings us to the release of the second season of the show, which picks up where the first left off, with the Bad Guys having moved into their new lair that we know from the films, and having become one of the top criminal enterprises in the city after a whole lot of adversity. The first season was titled The Bad Guys Breaking In, which was a pretty good title because it had a double meaning. The obvious, that it referred to the bad guys being criminals who specialize in heists and having to break into various different places in their line of work. But it also refers to the fact that during the course of the first season, they're rookies in the business and they're trying to make their mark. A common turn of phrase for when you're trying to enter a profession is breaking in, and so it made a lot of sense for the title during the course of season 1. Less so though when we're talking about season 2 and any other potential future seasons that come after that. After all, by the time we catch back up with them in season 2, they're seasoned criminals, and so it makes a lot of sense that they changed the title of the show to simply be The Bad Guys, the series. So I sat down to watch the show, which I have to say is fairly bingeable, and I thought that it was far superior to the original season. Like I said before, I really liked that first season and I thought it was good, but the second season is just a genuinely high quality show in my eyes. As for the overall consensus from critics and the wider audience, I'm kind of flying blind here as to whether I'm the outlier in enjoying the show. Hardly anybody ever talks about it, and there aren't that many reviews overall I found. That being said, from the reviews I have seen, there does seem to be an air of positivity about the show, or at least that first season, because, like I said, the second season's fairly fresh, and for a show that size, it means it probably hasn't got much traction, at least amongst people who are going to be making reviews like that. I also don't know whether it's gotten all that much viewership overall, because that's that sort of thing is hard to gauge on Netflix unless something's explosively popular and worms its way into the top 10 shows of the week, which it didn't manage to do. Now though, it's time for me to talk about my own thoughts. When we're talking about an animated show or film, I tend to like to break things down into three major overarching categories for us to talk about. We have the visual side of the film, which includes the animation quality and action, that sort of thing. We have the audio side of thing, which is largely based around music and voice acting, and then of course we have the narrative elements. Generally the best shows are going to tick all three boxes, but in my opinion, you can get away with letting some of them slip. In this context, where you know going into it, it's a budget Dreamworks show that won't have the original voices, I tend to be able to put that to one side and grade the first two elements on a much more generous curve. However, there is no mercy for a bad story because that should be a given here, and if it doesn't have high quality visuals or performances to hide behind, a shitty narrative and script can be exposed very badly as a result. With all that being said though, let's dive right in, shall we, and see what we can make of The Bad Guys Season 2. We'll start off by talking about the animation and visual side of things. It's very clearly not going to be on the same level as the films. There's just no way that anybody could go into this expecting it to look like the cinematic release. If you do, you're a fool. The films both have budgets of about $80 million apiece, which whilst quite low in the current era of animation, is still an absurd chunk of change to be thrown around. I would be shocked if this made-for-Netflix show had anywhere near that for a budget. So of course, as a result, we're going to have animation that just doesn't look anywhere near as good, but for what it is, I actually think it works well. The main two things that I think makes The Bad Guys stand out for me in a cinematic context is the fast-paced and at times absurd humor, and then the frantic action. It has a very unique sort of art style, and they replicate that pretty well here, but it obviously just doesn't look as sharp for obvious reasons. As for the action though, they're well and truly able to replicate that vibe very well, and they have a lot of really cool sequences, whether they're heists, fights, or chases. In that way, it well and truly lived up to the legacy of the films and was on par with that first season of the show, and perhaps was actually a bit better in that respect. Along with having a lesser budget comes less unique character models, but I actually kind of think that this played to their advantage in the show, and you have a lot of moments where you have them clearly reusing the same police officer design, but simply changing the skin color or giving them facial hair. For me, it sort of gave them this stormtrooper vibe where they're all these faceless goons, and I found it to be rather funny as a result. As opposed to just copying and pasting the exact same characters again and again in every scene, they did try to give them a little bit of visual variety, and I think it worked out well. It's not perfect, but it's great for what it is. Then we come to the audio side of things, and I have to say that historically, I was not a big fan of the voices they had for the TV show. The movies had some really iconic performances, but the specials I felt like were simply cheap knockoff versions of the characters. They didn't sound right to me, and the performances were overall weak. Then we come to the first season of the show, and I felt as if the cast had finally found their footing in that regard. Maybe having more content to work with helped, and I think the same could be said for the second season too. They've managed to lift their game yet again, and we have a really solid performance from everybody. There were no lines that sounded janky or bad, and I do think they really got close to the voices from the films. So here we are now, 2 for 2. The visual side of things for the second season is really good, and so is the audio. This in turn brings us to the final piece of that puzzle, the narrative elements. I think it's pretty clear to anybody who's watched this show that the story is what's going to matter most overall, and that's always the case with their Dreamworks shows because it's the major thing they can use to set themselves apart. The first season was rather good at this. It had a firm grasp of the characters and told a very compelling origin story. Each character across that season was given their own chance to shine, the jokes and gags were funny, the antagonists varied and interesting, and the story overall compelling. I think what I liked the most is that there were long-term overarching storylines that were played during that season that were then counterbalanced by the episodic format where there were more self-contained adventures and heists. The second season did just that, but at the same time it added a third layer to things. There was the larger overarching season-wide narrative of the bad guys being on top of the criminal world. They'd been enacting more and more heists to the point that they were the top crew in the city and are on a crime hot streak according to the news that they're very desperate to keep going for as long as they can. One of my favourite parts of the world is that the criminals are for some reason reported on as celebrities with a top crews list with rankings. They have fans to get excited when they commit crimes, and then there are also records in the media that the public keep track of. Things such as the length of a criminal hot streak, and their desire to keep their streak hot is something that runs through each episode, and with each episode the desperation grows and they pull off crazier and crazier stunts. At the same time as all of this, we have of course the individual episode hooks. The first episode involves the group forgetting Piranha's birthday, and thus they have to throw him one, only for the fermented fish he likes to eat to give them all amnesia, which in turn leads to what is essentially a parody episode of The Hangover, where the crew, sans Piranha, have to retrace their steps to figure out what the hell happened and why their friend is missing. Episode 2 sees them have a contest for the biggest room in the lair, which involves all of them quitting crime for as long as they can. The third episode involves them accidentally defrosting a preserved ancestor of Wolf, who they presume is the first ever thief, only to discover that she was the first ever law enforcement officer and guard, hence why she's been continually sabotaging their heists. The fourth episode follows the gang as they try to sabotage the wedding of Snake's mother to Wigglesworth, the escape/con artist from season 1, that all turned out to be faked to get the bad guys out of their lair, so Wolf's old thought-to-be-dead mentor, teased at the end of the first season, could try to recover his stashed gold. Stashed gold the different members of the team had already discovered and had been spending. This leads them on a heist to make the money back, where they're double-crossed and Wolf has the chance to join with his mentor, but refuses because he's part of the team. game. All of this comprises the first 5 episodes, and I think that's what I liked about this season. It had these medium-sized half-season storylines beyond the season-wide arc and also the individual episode stories. It gives you 3 tiers of storyline, and by having these I think it gives you a bit of satisfaction with narrative payoffs, tying that first half of the season together in a fun way, and allowing all these different outlandish concepts to build to something slowly in the background. I think when you're able to interweave these different layers of storytelling, that's when your show's able to hit a peak in the narrative. I also like that they were then able to create a link between this first half-season arc and then the second half-season arc by having DB kidnapped by the season's ultimate antagonist, Ripper, which all ties back into the finale, which we'll come to in a bit. The second arc of the season revolves around the bad guys continuing their streak, but in the background a new enemy is rising slowly but surely. Episode 6 sees the bad guys undergo a crisis as their hot streak comes under threat by a copycat crew who try to double-cross them before the bad guys are able to pull off a daring escape and defeat them. This gang is then kidnapped by Ripper at the end after they're beaten down by the bad guys. Episode 7 follows the bad guys' attempts to replace Piranha as their getaway driver with an AI named Beverly that Webb's created. Of course, Beverly discovers that the bad guys are kind of stupid and succeed most days by the skin of their teeth, and this causes her to go insane and try to achieve world domination before being defeated and turned into an AI toaster. Episode 8 involves Shark going out of his way to ruin the acting career of an old friend, whilst they're trying to steal her priceless one-of-a-kind acting award. Episode 9 and 10 are then a two-parter, which really just ties so much from this season and the last season together, as the gang are forced to team up with rivals the Night Owls and the Gruff Goats to take down Ripper. This finale is really what tied everything together for me, as you could see elements of each of the episodes that in hindsight were built into this moment, whilst also using the character dynamics and the relationships the bad guys have built up over the course of the first 2 seasons to tie it all together. Like I said, they team up with their rivals, but they're helped in prison by Wolf's mentor and are subsequently aided by Tiffany Fluffett, who they'd befriended across season 1 and 2. Their popularity as a team is used to get the public to rise against Ripper, and their copycat team act as decoys for them too. It was just a really concise, well-written season that made every episode matter, even if it was a little absurd. Hell, they even foreshadow Ripper's capture at the hand of their own robot by showing Beverly losing her cool and betraying the bad guys only a couple of episodes before. There's truly no narrative waste. Everything matters. The dialogue's fun, there's so much continuity. Things don't reset at the end of each episode, and the characters remember things that have happened to them. The jokes are great and range from witty to so stupid it's funny to utterly absurd and random. Then there's the fact there are 5 main protagonists, and many shows would struggle to flesh them all out and would solely hone in on 1 or 2 of them. Instead, we get the full spread and we explore each of them in depth across the episodes. We see Wolf continue to develop his team player mindset and show his dedication to the team when he abandons his mentor. We get Shark backstory with his superstar actor friend. Piranha goes from getaway driver of the crew to the muscle. There's further exploration of Snake's traumatic upbringing and how that shaped him into the jaded, surly curmudgeon we know. Webbs feels like she plays an integral role in pretty much every single episode, although I will say she probably gets the least personal development in that way. She does show she is far more cunning than the others, I guess, but that's about it. In the end, I just think the writing here was extremely strong, especially for a made-for-Netflix Dreamworks show. Usually the characters are written to be about as deep as a puddle, but here, it really feels like how the old Dragon shows did back in the mid-2010s. They take the characters and they add new layers of complexity to them that help you really connect with the story and the characters, whilst also enhancing the viewing experience when it comes to the films, even though by this point longtime Dreamworks fans would know the films do not consider the show's canon. That being said, I do personally take them into account, and I think it just makes the characters so much more fully realized as a result. I'm super hopeful for a season 3 because, yeah, this was great. Of course though, with all that being said, these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the second season of The Bad Guys, the series? Did you like it? Hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.